Welcome to the Outer Realms with Michelle, Desrochers, and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday night segment of The Outer Realm. We are broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. We are fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee, who have been a part of our journey since the very beginning. That's a long time now. You know, we are into our fourth year, so this is like yay Folgers. So thank you very much. We could not do it without you. Also, a big thank you for our other sponsor, Justin Snicker, aka Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, who is the voice and music you hear in the intro. And you don't hear the outro too often. We just never get that far in, but he has done one of those for us as well. So he's an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found anywhere that you listen to your favorite music. So check out all those platforms. Also, big thank you to artist Steve McGinnis, who is basically the artist behind the banners and the logos here at the Outer Realm. Check him out on Facebook and Instagram. We're really happy with what he's done for us. He does a lot of commission pieces, but specialized is in horror. That's right. See a theme there? It's a theme that's going on there. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, tonight, we've been waiting a long time for this because we just, we just have really been waiting a long time for this. This woman is wonderful. And, we've been communicating back and forth. And I know everybody else has been waiting as well. So for the very first time tonight, Suzy Hansen, who is in the green room waiting, by the way, all the way from New Zealand. She's a founding director of UFOFOCUS New Zealand Research Network. I know. Say that 3 times, people. She's also a UFO extraterrestrial experiencer, researcher, and she is the go-to person in New Zealand for anything UFO and ET related. So really looking forward to that. And I hope everybody's chiming in already. So thank you for all of that. Wayne, Dolly, Chris, thank you. Samantha, hello.
Samantha.
So Amelia, do you want to do
Wayne.
a short form intro?
Oh,
you don't?
I just released it because you said everything I was going to say.
Then I said it. Let's just get to the fun and bring Suzy in, because I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been like waiting a while. Here we go.
Yes. Hi.
Hello.
Hi there.
How are you?
At last.
At last, yes.
I'm fine, thank you.
Oh my gosh. What time is it there, Suzy? It's probably a dumb question, but
1:15 in the afternoon.
Very nice.
If I could only go back to 1 o'clock today in the afternoon, because then I could sleep. That is lovely. I see the daylight coming in. That's why.
Yes, it's actually a very rainy day today, so let's hope we don't lose the connection.
Wow.
No, hopefully not. That wouldn't be right. We've been waiting for you for a long time. So
I know.
So excited too.
My producer says, he goes, so you have Suzy Hansen on? I said, yes. He goes, just so you know, she's my favorite. I went, that's nice. No, you can't come on.
I'm sure he's
have to watch the archive. I know. But anyway, welcome to the Outer Realm. We're so glad you made it, and I cannot wait to hear about everything. I know we're not going to have enough time to cover everything, and I have a feeling I'm going to be requesting another date with you, and I hope you'll indulge us. I guess I always like to start at humble beginnings. How did you get to this point? Because you've got this huge research foundation now, pretty much. So did it start with an experience or curiosity? Take her away.
It actually started with a rather strange sighting that occurred late afternoon on a lonely country road in New Zealand where I was travelling with my flatmate. And we saw a light appear up ahead, disappeared. We assumed it was an agricultural aircraft coming into land with its landing lights on, but then suddenly it appeared beside us above the adjacent hills. So it went backwards and forwards a few times at such speed, I guess, that it appeared to be appearing and disappearing in one place and moving to another. My flatmate was a scientist, and he decided that it was fast-moving helicopter because he couldn't fit it into any other box. But of course, it wasn't a helicopter. It couldn't cover kilometers in a split second. So after we'd watched it for a bit, as the car came to a standstill while we watched it, we moved off again because it seemed to disappear. But within seconds, it actually came up behind us. The light was like a massive oval orb of light that came right over our car. The noise that accompanied it was extraordinary. Now, most people say UFOs don't make a noise, but there's plenty of examples on record that show that sometimes they do, and this did. And the last thing I remember, I must have passed out, and he had certainly passed out, was the car lifting off the ground like an airplane leaving the tarmac. And it was a lovely sunny late afternoon. I don't remember any more after that until it was as if someone clapped loudly beside me, and I seemed to wake up. And there was a feeling of flotation, then a feeling of the car hitting the road. It was completely dark, pitch black on a country road. The car engine started up, the lights came on, and we were at the far end of the 2.5 kilometre straight that we'd been at the other end of when we last had memory. So when we got back to our flat, we discovered we had 90 minutes missing time. And this was 1975 and I was 20, and this catapulted me into UFO sighting research. And also a little later on, when books started coming into New Zealand about the subject, into missing time and contact or abduction experiences, because that appeared to be what I had experienced.
Was that something that you immediately shared with friends and family after it happened, or did you hesitate? When did you start talking about it?
No, this was New Zealand, and we only had at that point 2.5 million population. So it was like everyone knew everyone in these small towns and cities. It probably would have been devastating for me to state anything because I was a young teacher at the time. So I was reluctant to tell anyone.
Right.
Even the rest of our flatmates, we were quite a few people in our flat. I talked to them about it, but I kind of omitted some details that I thought would be too much for them. And no one could understand what we'd been through. And my flatmate eventually left the flat, would not discuss it, took on the classic angry, I don't want to know stance. I'm a scientist, it doesn't fit, so I don't want to know.
Right.
In those days, it's different now, but that case. So it was something like a little burden that I carried for a long time until I began to gain information and understand things better.
Yeah, different times for sure. I think that falls under anything that would be considered high strangeness was don't talk about things like that. I grew up in a household, and it was very open-minded, but it was always a concern about what would other people think, But I mean, with knowing, I'm sure what you know through research, having experiences later on in life usually stems from a childhood. Do you feel that you had childhood contact, knowing what you know now?
Yes, well, I'd had some quite extraordinary memories from childhood, which I had discussed with my mother and only my mother as a child, and these. I recall these from childhood as sort of very specific dreams, is one way of putting it, because as a child, what other kind of box do you put it in? Nothing was known about this sort of thing in New Zealand in those days. So it wasn't until this occurred at the age of 20 and I sort of got catapulted into research that I began to work out what had happened to me. And I had an experience some years later where I had the realization that all of these things I'd recalled from childhood, actually these dreamlike memories actually fitted the classic contact experience of being taken on board a craft. So there was that link that I finally accepted in my life, that this had been happening a long time and there must be a reason for it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have in New Zealand, I mean, this side of the world, there's always a big concern about the fact that maybe it's a reverse engineered craft that we get more of with respects to sightings. Do you feel, is it the same in New Zealand? Do you guys have a lot of that also?
Well, we have quite a large and rich history of UFO sightings in our tiny little remote country, and perhaps the fact that we're remote might be the key to that. But also we had some excellent veteran researchers in the early days who documented these events very well. They were former Air Force, so 3 in particular were former Air Force, and they were very meticulous with their documentation of sightings and their interviews. So I have behind me in many cupboards those archives and historic archives. So in terms of back engineered craft, perhaps we have them here. We have had some sightings in New Zealand that were very noisy and fitted the description of some of the maybe back engineered stuff, and others that were extremely quiet, big black triangles, etc. It's difficult to know which is which, but we certainly have had a huge variety of kinds of sightings here.
Right. Well, I know here we tend to go through the same sort of stuff, and people are just very, I think they're more open to talking about it now. And I'll ask you the same question. How do you know the difference between something that's reverse engineered or,
Well,
real?
when we look at UFOs, we've got certain categories that we kind of use to identify that it's something out of the normal conventional aircraft, and that is acute turns, escalation in speed that's astronomical, no big bang as they reach high speed, etc. And of course, it's entirely possible that back engineered craft, if they exist, have that same kind of technology. So as we have progressed, particularly in the last 10 years, I think it's become harder and harder to analyze footage and to look at people's experiences, because one, we have people who just throw things onto the internet without first having them examined by an expert. So once it's out there, people make fun of it, and even if it is real, it's going to be classified as wacky eventually. And two, we just don't have the know-how to understand what is real and what is not real, or what is perhaps extraterrestrial or from out there, and what may be our own. It's got harder and harder with AI and CGI and all of that.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. We have a question. Dolly here is also an aware experiencer. Her story is brand new out there. Amelia, can you get this one?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, Dolly. Dolly asks, how intact are your memories?
Could I have an explanation of what she actually means by that?
Yeah, yes, Dolly, if you can expand on that, please.
Okay. She also asks, have you had any conversations with ET?
Okay, yes, I have. I now understand that I've been taken on board craft since a very small child, and I've had many conversations with ET throughout my life. I'm fortunate that I have a lot of conscious memory of being on a craft, conversations, technology, etc., which I talk about, and in speeches. Much of the technology I have seen 20 or 30 years ago is only just becoming known to humanity at this time. We have much less sophisticated versions of it coming out, which makes me wonder where it's come from in the first place, and is it being back engineered. So I have a lot of intact and conscious memories. There are some areas that I have had gaps that I've had filled in with regression, but by and large, mine are conscious memories, as I state in my book. And a lot of the information that I was given during these visits, I have seen roll out in the last 20 or 30 years. Just one thing after another has come out and corroborated what I was told and shown on craft throughout my life.
Well, that's fascinating.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That because a lot of people have no recollection for whatever reason. So you basically have become the go-to person in New Zealand for people who are having sightings and experiences. How has that been for you? Like being an experiencer yourself, because you have some stories that are really benign and positive, and you have others that are just terrifying.
Yes, my own experiences were positive. There were times when I was frightened, like when the car was lifted off the road in Hawke's Bay. But ultimately, nothing bad happened to me, and my memories of being on board craft largely are based around using technology and being taught about their consciousness-assisted technology and how to use it, and being exposed to aspects of consciousness that we don't yet understand. And our reactions were observed and noted, and we were taught quite a lot. So these have been very positive experiences for me. In terms of New Zealand, for many years, it was like trying to squeeze blood out of a stone to get people to talk about their sightings and experiences. Prior to 1978, when we had our massively publicised Kaikoura light sightings in New Zealand, people were sort of quite happy to talk about something they'd seen over a hill or on the farm or whatever. But once those sightings happened and there was a bit of a whitewash by the government and some of the departments associated with it, it really divided the country, and it made it harder after that for people to talk about their sightings and experiences.
Of course.
In New Zealand, it's still difficult for a lot of people to talk about their experiences. And of course, with a small population, we don't have the numbers that you would have overseas.
Right.
Well, neither does Canada. Kathy Hanley, hi Kathy, just asked, and you answered part of that question. She asked, in the USA there are a lot of cover-ups in regards to UFOs. What about in your country, in New Zealand?
Okay, well, I talk about this with my colleagues overseas quite a bit, because I have spoken quite a number of times in the States on speaking tours, and got to know quite a lot of people. And it is evident to me and to many other researchers outside of the States that the rest of the world has a slightly different view. There's on the whole UFO subject to the States. In the States, yes, there's a lot of cover-ups evident, and a lot of emphasis is put on released documents, etc. Now, I was instigated the release of the New Zealand UFO files by lobbying the Chief of Defence for a couple of years until they were released. But we understood that there probably wouldn't be a great deal in there, and there wasn't. We really did it as a public relations operation, really, to bring this subject to the attention of the public, maybe break down some of the taboos about it. But we do have, I think the arm of the USA in terms of the UFO subject is a very long arm, and it reaches a lot of other countries who may have certain political agreements with the States. And so it's sort of you get the impression that certain countries are towing the line, is the way I'll put it, with the United States, and sitting back watching what's going to happen. Because when the files were released in New Zealand, the Chief of Defence stated that as far as they were concerned, they were no longer interested in looking at anything to do with UFOs, that, as far as they were concerned, they were either misidentified aircraft or anomalies, natural anomalies. So that really wiped the slate clean and enabled them to sort of slither out underneath and not have to look at anything UFO again. So they are now sitting there in this position of denial, and now the States has come out saying, well, actually, these UFOs are real and we're looking at them. So they've kind of got egg on their face now, some of these countries who've made these kinds of statements, and they're sitting very quiet on their hands, waiting to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, because there are some countries in the world that really have always talked about this openly. I know France has been very wide open. You know, they would have an incident and they would share it with the people of France on an average. I'm not saying, you know, all of them, but also countries like, you know, Brazil and Peru, like the South American countries are a lot more open about it. You know, you can find information pretty readily.
Yes, that's correct. And that openness, as you said, like South America is very wide open in terms of accepting and researching it, and other countries.
Exactly.
The Commonwealth countries are kind of sticking together on their stance at the moment. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK, etc.
Yeah,
so yes, I think that there will be a lot coming out, and it won't necessarily come from the States. I think a lot of other countries now are examining things quietly and perhaps getting into the position where they may eventually make statements, but nothing too overt in our country at the moment.
Right. So do you think, and I'll put this out there because there's so much talk about it, and I'm curious as to your opinion, false flags. A lot of people figure, because U.S. was one of the last countries, especially, to come out discussing, you know, their disclosure and that this was a thing. Do you think that false flag might be the reason for that?
I don't know, really, because that's all very much tied up with American politics, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, we are part of it in a sense that we are part of the Five Eyes communications agreement with the US, Canada, UK, Australia.
Yes.
So, you know, there's that kind of link that exists. But I'm not sure about false flags. We sort of, you know, people have a lot of theories about that, but New Zealand don't have any particular stance or view on that at present. We just kind of watch it.
Kind of coast along. Yeah, it's something that comes up often, even in our chat rooms when we have guests on. So I'm just going to jump it, like go right to it, and just see. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's one of those things that we're going to have to sit back and wait and see what happens. Now, when you are, obviously you get people from all walks of life that come to you. Do you find that they are coming with intact memories, being fully conscious, or do they have to go through regressions? And what similarities are you finding with them?
Well, people come with all levels and all kinds of memories. And some of them, I believe, are mistakenly attributed to you know, a non-human entity in terms of an extraterrestrial or an ultra-terrestrial, when in fact they may be a spirit contact. You know, people mistake things, but most people who come to me have quite fragmented memories, spasmodic memories. That's quite normal. Sometimes they regain more as time goes by. Sometimes they just don't. Regression is a difficult one because for many years it wasn't really well known. And then, of course, we had John Mack, who did relaxation techniques, which in effect were a form of regression. And other researchers of the time, David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins. So it sort of gained momentum and popularity. But nowadays I find things have exploded in terms of that kind of therapy. And in all of my travels, I have found that there's a lot of people who have absolutely no qualifications whatsoever in hypnotherapy. And I think you need to have qualifications and be registered to understand what you are doing. because
Yes.
we are looking at a person's mind, their memories. And I think we have to be very careful about that. I hear some horror stories about so-called therapists who claim to have qualifications who don't have those qualifications and are doing a lot of damage.
Yes.
So when people come to me now and say, should I have some regression? I generally say, well, that's entirely up to you. But if you want my opinion at this point in time, no. The fact that you can remember some things that maybe fit into the characteristic lay of the land when it comes to contact with ET or non-human entities, if they are following the trend in a lot of ways, and you listen in depth to what they have to say and analyze it and talk to them about it over a number of sessions, you can fairly soon, especially if you're an experiencer yourself, get a handle on where they're coming from, what they're talking about. And so, I think that keeping your memory intact at present is a good idea. We don't know where this is going in the future, and I think we just need to, this wait and see attitude, while also working quietly in the background, is a good stance to take at this moment, to observe what's coming out and whether or not that is real in terms of information coming out of the States at the moment. I think a certain measure of being circumspect is a good idea.
I agree. And I agree with the hypnotherapy. I also think it's one of those careful what you wish for things, because once you tap into that, you can't really undo it. You really have to be prepared for the influx of memories that you may get, and it may not be what you think.
Exactly, and that's what I always explain to people, because this can be life-changing, but not only your life, it can affect your entire family and friends. You can lose family members, as I have seen with some people I've worked with overseas. You can lose your spouse or whatever. It's a really dicey path to walk, and you have to really think about it carefully and talk to people that you trust before you make that quite momentous decision.
Right.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
Another question here. Here we go.
Thank you. Dolly asks, what has ET told you about their reason for being here, their message?
Well, that's going to be difficult to encapsulate, because the book that I've written is largely all about that. It's about a positive agenda that they are rolling out on the planet for several decades now. And we're moving into what I call the time of the third wave of human beings who incarnated on this planet. So the equivalent of my children's age. And this is a positive agenda. It's being run by a number of ET groups, not just the Greys. The Greys are the front people, the ones who have the skills in certain areas. But behind them, there are other species that many experiencers, including myself, have seen on craft that are working together. And this agenda is to help us raise, one, our spirituality, and two, raise our consciousness towards a time when we can have some open contact with some of these species. Because at the moment, we may think that a disclosure is going to take place, but we have to examine what we mean by disclosure, because almost everyone I talk to has a different definition of disclosure. If it means a whole lot of documents being released by, say, the US government, well, we might get some of that. Yes, we've had a little bit of that already. But there's much deeper disclosure that needs to take place, and that is going to affect every area of our society, from our schools and institutions, the way we do medicine and healing, our infrastructure, everything that we have come to know in our lives could change overnight with this association with other species. So, this has to be approached very slowly and carefully. I often hear people in the UFO field say, oh, we're ready for disclosure, we want it now. But when we look at the amount of people involved in the UFO field worldwide, it's minuscule. And what about the rest of humanity? What do they know about the subject, and do they care? Do they want to know? And how will it affect them? We may have acclimatized ourselves to the idea, but what about all of the rest of humanity? So there's a lot of things to be taken into account. And this is why the agenda of 3 waves of souls incarnating into the planet that I first spoke about publicly in 2007, have known about since a child, that's why this is being rolled out in a slow and careful manner. And a lot of the technology that I and others have seen on craft, I believe, is bridging technology that's leading us slowly to a close point closer to what they are capable of, because what they are capable of would seem like absolute magic to us. Even though we have had advances in science and physics recently, this is way beyond that. So they have to lead us by the nose in small increments towards this.
When you say coming in waves of souls, for example, 3 waves of like volunteers, souls, so they're basically gearing us for advancement, enlightenment, awakening.
Yes, all of that. And the one thing that they press home on the craft is our lack of spirituality, in that we are in many ways on the planet going backwards, and that maybe in previous times on this planet we've been a little bit more spiritual and close to nature than we are now.
Yes,
and we are losing that link, which is essential to our survival. And but not only that, we can't meet advanced races out there on a global basis if we have these warlike tendencies, and we're totally divided and we can't operate as one planet. I think Michio Kaku summed it up, when the physicist, when he said that we become a planetary civilization, and then we can become a global civilization, and then we start moving out into other realms and other areas before we can meet who's out there. And we're not yet a global civilization. So it was a first step that he talked about towards this, and we haven't achieved that yet. So we actually have a long way to go.
I agree. If you think back to ancient civilizations, they've left traces of cohabitation and emulation, looking at petroglyphs. And I mean, that's all over the world, where you show a really amazing and very not so unique, when you're thinking about the grand scheme of all of these cultures throughout the world that exhibit the same sort of drawings and structures. Where do you think it changed? Like, we went from being so involved and very, in contact and learning and growing spiritually on every level. And then all of a sudden we're in this day and age, and it's like we hit a brick wall. We fell behind in technology, everything.
Well, the ETs have said that with our technology, we develop quite quickly in the technological age, the modern age, but the spirituality that goes along with the use of that the right use of that technology did not advance at the same speed. So we often on this planet focus on developing technology that actually harms other humans, harms the environment, harms nature. So until we realize that we have to have a spiritual input and a spiritual aspect to our technology, then we're going to keep going backwards in this way. And we know there's the potential we could destroy ourselves, or destroy the nature of this planet, transform it into something else that we don't like and we don't want to live in.
Right.
So, I have grave concerns about us going out into space. It's all very well to be putting the James Webb telescope out there. That's fantastic. But, going out there and looking at setting up bases on other planets is a concern, considering the state of our own planet. Are we just going to keep going out there and doing that to other places?
Right.
We need to get it together here first. And the spirituality is essential for the right use of technology. And I think things went backwards for us when we first used nuclear technology to harm others.
Yes.
And I describe in a chapter of my book a long discussion I had with an ET who showed me holograms of when this happened, and how this was the step back, and this was a call out right throughout the solar system that this place needs help before they destroy themselves and destroy other civilizations in the process.
Which brings me to this next question. Amelia.
Kathy asks, what are your feelings about the possibility of interdimensional visits versus interplanetary visits?
And taking it to the next step is not everything comes from space or the stars. Do you believe that they're right here? Aside from dimensional, let's just throw the whole gambit in. I'll let you take it where you want.
Absolutely. And I write about coming in, being beamed up with some other humans, and arriving in a hallway, walking into a hallway on a large craft, and seeing some greys materializing into what we would call, or many people would call, a light being. And we were told at that point that that's how they move or transport or appear interdimensionally. So this is already going on. I've been in a situation in what I call the white room on a craft, where they attempted to get humans to transform their physical form into something else. And I have been searching for other experiencers who've experienced what I call the white room. And so far I've discovered 3, 4, possibly 4. The 4th one I haven't spoken to yet, but 4 people who can describe this. So this whole interdimensional thing is a reality. It's happening already. Many experiencers have witnessed it or been part of it. So, this is a reality, and it will be part of our future. They show us a lot of things on craft and tell us this: you'll do this one day. This will be part of your future. And probably the closest one that's coming up for us will be telepathy.
Right. I believe, between telepathy is a big one. Absolutely. There's a lot of paranormal things that go on, I find, with contactees. I've worked in both fields for a couple of decades, small on the scale of what you put in. But I have found that at least 50% of anything paranormal that I've worked on have had, UFO and extraterrestrial crossovers. Do you find that as well?
Yes, I think experiencers and abductees are kind of magnets in some ways for that kind of thing. When you talk to people about their experiences, they want to tell you about their ET experiences, but when you say, well, looking back on your life, have you had it much in the way of paranormal? And they go, oh, yes. And I'll actually give you a much bigger list of the paranormal than the memories of the contact experiences. And that's all a part of it. Because when you go on a craft, often if they're in a hurry, because time is short with you on the craft, they have to get you back again. And often they will say, okay, rise up. That's the words that they use. And we know that means to expand your auric field, expand your consciousness to match that of the organic feeling of the craft. Because when you go on there, it's not like being down here in your living room or your bedroom or whatever. It's a totally different environment, and you have been trained since early childhood to do certain things. So telepathy is absolutely normal. Passing through walls is absolutely normal. Levitating objects is absolutely normal for many experiencers. But you can't do it here because you are not tapped into the same level of consciousness that you tap into on a craft. So yes, I think experiencers carry this over back into their normal life. They have a heightened awareness of things. They often see spirits, talk with spirits, and other paranormal aspects.
I agree. I agree. As as an experiencer. I will go with that. Question.
Sure. Dolly asks, have you been developing your psychic abilities, and do you believe humanity should be doing this as well?
I haven't consciously developed my psychic abilities here, except I have on the craft, because that's what you're required to do, as I just mentioned. A lot of people go to psychic development groups, and there's no harm in that, going and learning what you're capable of doing. But at the same time, as a medium myself since early childhood, I would like to register a warning there that that there's a lot of entities and spirits out there that if you don't know what you're doing and you've laid yourself wide open, you are asking for trouble. So you actually have to either work with someone who knows what they're doing or don't do it at all. Because I believe, having been part of this program of 3 waves of souls incarnating for a purpose, I believe that we've all got a purpose. And some of us have a purpose, probably millions on this planet have a purpose within this agenda that I'm talking about. And we may not know it, but we're part of it. And I believe many scientists are actually part of it, but don't know it. Mm-hmm. So, if something is going to develop in your life and it's within your soul's destiny to do something, it's going to happen. You don't have to go out there and make it happen, force it to happen. You lead a good life, and you take an interest in nature and the environment and, spirituality. And these things will fall in front of you when they're meant to fall in front of you. 100%. And then you'll find you may have an escalation of psychic ability, and you'll come to understand it better. But there is no harm in reading about it, etc. But you just have to be a little careful, because there are forces out there, as the ETs acknowledge, that that are not necessarily benign or benevolent. Mm-hmm. Yes. We have to be careful.
So what do you think about because with keeping all of that in mind, with extreme caution, what are your thoughts on the whole CE5 movement? People just inviting this in and maybe not being, how do you verse yourself in something like that?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, because I've had some, I've been given my opinion sometimes, and I've ended up with very angry CE5ers. So I would just say,
no, that's okay. We throw everything in the mix. Our people will go for it.
I have sounded a warning that's right across the board. Yes. My last thing I talked about. But we do have to be careful what we invite in, and we have to be sure that we can deal with it and handle it. Mm-hmm. And I think this that caution isn't always there in some groups that exist. I don't have a problem with people, sitting out in the night air or whatever and trying to make contact. But a lot of the footage that I have seen as a fairly veteran UFO sighting investigator of 48 years, a lot of the footage I've seen is quite clearly satellites and iridium flares from satellites. But then there are other pieces of footage I've seen that are quite extraordinary. So, it's just what people want to do with their life. If that's what you want to do and you feel that you're gaining something from it, that's fine. But always have that margin of caution.
Right. Yeah, I imagine, I think for people who are who've experienced it before, or people who are, I guess, if you're there amongst friends, it's a whole group of you, it might be a little bit easier, to blend into it. But there are people who go out there completely by themselves and do this sort of thing. I think with anything, not just this specifically, I think when you're dealing with things that you are not familiar with or versed in, you should always do your research and you should prepare yourself, because it's like anything in life. I don't want to just pick on this specifically, but you just never know what is waiting on the other end. I think with extraterrestrials on average, I think if you can get over the fear of the unknown of all of it, I think that's half the battle. Because I mean, with me, I know now I had a lot of childhood experiences, but when it started to resurface as an adult and you have something coming into your room at night, it's okay, that's just creepy, stop it. Like, that's not even acceptable. And that was really my part of the whole thing, that it took me a while to deal with that part of it. And once I did, getting a bit of a, okay, I think I'm okay with this, but not all the time. So I think if you're going out there without any sort of preparation, you really have to think that it could be an experience maybe that you're not yet prepared for. So, okay, next question.
I also think that education is really important in that. Self-education, as you've talked about, Michelle, finding more about it until you reach that comfort point. But certainly just people educating themselves about what Venus looks like and what a Chinese lantern looks like at distance and how it operates with wind shears, etc., what iridium flares look like, all that kind of thing is really important. People want it to be a special experience or a paranormal or an ET experience, when in actual fact sometimes it will have a rational cause, and some people are not willing to accept that. I think that being logical is very important in these fields.
I think so. I don't necessarily think you have to go through a whole process. I've mentioned this a few times, like Russian scientists going back into the 70s and 80s. They say, well, we don't have to go into space because we know how to call them. And they use one specific base, and they would go out there and just call them, and they would come in. I know for myself, when you talk about telepathy, like, I didn't do a CE5 thing. I just went out there, probably because now knowing I had experiences as a child, I just went out there and just thought it. And then all the experiences started again. So it's like, I think if there's that connection, like you say, if it's meant to be your time again, it'll awaken inside of you and you'll be able to they're just there. The connection's already there.
That's right. Yeah. And when it's meant to start rolling, it'll start rolling.
I agree. I'm living it. Yes. So Dolly's got all the questions tonight. Yay. All right.
Solly's, I believe she's making a statement. Psychic ability teaches discernment to know what is positive versus negative.
One would think. Yeah.
Yes.
One would think.
Having psychic ability doesn't necessarily equip you with discernment. I've worked with a lot of people over the years who were wide open psychically. They were experiencing all kinds of things and rushing here and rushing there, joining this group and doing that, because they had no discernment. They were just being overwhelmed and swamped by paranormal and psychic experiences. And until they shut themselves down a little bit and calmed down and started slowing down and being examining.
Yeah, right here.
You can rush around wasting a lot of time and energy being illogical, especially if it's very new to you. Some people, it's new to them and it's fantastic, but then they become a breakdown basket case because it's been too much.
I agree. I'm working with people within the paranormal field. I can tell you it's easier for them to accept that there's a malevolent energy in their space. You mentioned like ET, that throws them over. Like many times through the years, that's something that people, it just does not register. Yeah, Amelia's one. Amelia's in complete denial. So we all know different though, but you won't go there.
I don't remember anything, and I'm actually extremely frightened. Pardon?
So you knitted me an ET. I know
I crocheted that. Yeah, I know. It's so creepy looking at it this way. It's almost like Annabelle in that glass box. But I have a fear of it. So I love speaking to our guests about their experiences. I enjoy listening, but I never try to figure out if I've had those. I just sort of
We already know. But
It's enough for me with what I do, being a medium and a remote viewer. It's enough for me. I don't right now in my life, I couldn't handle dealing with that as well. And if I am experiencing anything, I'd like to think that they're protecting me to make sure I'm not overwhelmed.
Well, I think that's great because, you know, I know experiencers who've had researchers push them into the limelight, push them in for their own own agenda, push them into the limelight and kind of manage them. And that's a terrible thing to do when people are not ready for it and have not assimilated it into their day-to-day life and gained some understanding of it. So, you know, there's that caution again, and if it's right for you, that's good.
Yeah.
She just comes over here and she's able to get the full experience.
We live very close to each other, but
do not follow me home. I know. So let's talk hybrids. How do you know a hybrid? Do they look like, because this is, again, I'm putting up there, I know, but for everybody listening, this comes up a lot. How do you know a hybrid when you see one? Do they look like your neighbor, or do they have these strong extraterrestrial attributes?
Well, the hybrids I've come across, and there was only a small handful that I've come across on the planet here, and I could feel by their frequency or their vibe what they were. I had quite an extraordinary experience with one after I'd spoken at the 1999 UFO Congress in the States. And that person really saved me, so to speak, because I had been threatened by people that I was told were some agents. I'd been threatened to go home and be quiet and not talk about my experiences ever again, or something could happen to me.
That's more scary than something that happens.
Exactly. And so when my husband and I got in a vehicle rental, were picked up by a rental company vehicle to go down to the rental building and get a car, so we do a little bit of touring. There was this strange man in the front seat, and he made all my hair stand on end because I knew that he was not human and fully human, and he looked odd. He behaved oddly, and it was as if the driver didn't actually know he was there. She didn't actually converse with him, and we didn't either. It was like we'd been somehow muted from conversing with him. When we got to the building, the driver got out and went in and said, "I'll go and sort out the papers for your car. You can come in when you're ready." And I had made up my mind, because of the threats that I'd had at the conference, I made up my mind that I would go home because I wanted to protect my family, and I would never talk about anything again. And this man, if I can call him a man, turned his head right around at an odd angle, looked at me with these china blue eyes, and said to me that I was to keep going, and, you know, I would be looked after. And then he said it telepathically. I suddenly realized his mouth hadn't moved. But the interesting thing is, my husband heard it too in his head. And this man, if I'll call him that, got out of the car, went into the building, and I ran after him because I wanted to say, "Who are you? Why did you say that?"
Can I poke you and see if you're real? Yeah.
Through the door a matter of 2 or 3 seconds after him, and he was nowhere to be seen. So my husband and I went into the toilets and everywhere. He was nowhere in this circular building, and there was only one other door exit, which was behind the desks of the people working there. So he wouldn't have gone out, probably wouldn't have gone out there without being noticed. He was nowhere to be seen. So I took that as being a message to me that I was to carry on doing what I'm doing.
Wow.
So in answer to that question, the hybrids on board craft are the ones that are important. The ones that we might see down here are what I call one of the echelons that have been produced, if I can use that term, produced by the ETs. And I have seen the ones on board craft, and they are phenomenal entities, beings, and they have a specific purpose in the future. So yes, you identify them by their frequency. I came across another one on one occasion on a craft, which I've got a drawing of in my book, and he gave me the most useful piece of information that any ET's given me, and that is, when I saw him, I was so in awe of him. I asked him a silly question. I said, "Can you tell me something that will be useful for my future?" And he just said one word, which was corroboration.
Wow.
And from that point on, I set about trying to find experiencers who could corroborate some of the things that I have seen and experienced. So there's the white room. There's the technology that can see inside your body. There's a handheld technology that can do the same. There's a number of things I have found now. There's the light elevator, which is also in my book. And I've found a handful of experiencers worldwide who can describe exactly the same in the context of their own experience. So this is the kind of thing that people like the late John Mack couldn't turn away from, this corroboration that ran through a lot of people describing the same thing, who don't know each other, who live in different sides of the planet. And there was this line of information running through the experiencer documentation that he had that he recognized.
Dolly, who's in chat, is a hybrid. And I think, yeah, I'll connect you guys just to talk, separately. And because I think you guys could probably get a lot of information from one another. So she's sort of on, the same path, trying to meet people who are experiencing a lot of different things and following on the journey that she was told to follow. So I think when you're out there, I do believe that the people of like mind, or people who are on, similar journeys, will find a way to one another. And I think that becomes so much in the whole consciousness part of everything.
Many experiencers talk about how they've been told they've had genetic intervention, which would make, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of experiencers possible hybrids. So, this is actually a big thing for humanity to look at in the future. It's huge.
I think you'll get people who talk about it more willingly than others. I think you have those who, probably because of fear of who's actually listening or watching, are not necessarily going to come out and just say, "Oh, hey, here I am." I think they're going to play onto the side of caution, and I know that there are some who've been told, "Yes, this is what you are," and you just don't talk about it. Don't get hypnotized. Don't do any of this stuff.
Yep.
Do you come across those as well?
Yes, the third wave of souls that I describe in my book fit into that category. They are described by the ETs as the concealed ones. The ETs have kept them concealed for a reason, and it's not a negative reason, it's a positive reason to protect them. And they've also said to me that, things could get quite hot for experiencers in the future. When the world has to accept that not only are there things in the sky that aren't ours, but some people have had contact with them. Because once again, and there's a huge area of humanity that doesn't know anything about this and doesn't want to know, and has never even looked at this kind of information.
Right.
So it's very good for people to be very cautious about what they admit to people and who they admit it to.
Right. Yeah. I think you're going to have a whole onslaught of people who may come forward at some point, but I think they would have to feel safe in doing so. And I don't think, we're in that time right now for a lot of people. I hear more people who don't even want to talk about their experiences. I mean, you hear it more and more that people are coming out, but there are a lot that are still very, very leery.
Yes, that's right. And Yeah, the ET said that at some time in the future, and I think we're just right at the very beginning of that now. At some time in the future, people would start coming forward en masse, and they would be what I call the second wave, which is my generation. So they will be grandparents, and they'll be the older generation who've had working lives. They've had professions, jobs, families, long-time friends, standing in the community, etc. And when they come out and admit these things, people are going en masse. People are going to have to sit up and listen. When Granddad suddenly says, "Actually, I've had all these experiences all this time," are you going to say that's rubbish? Or when you see that a lot of other people in the same age bracket are coming out and saying the same, do you start to see a pattern there and take an interest in it?
Mm-hmm. I was fortunate.
Hundreds monkey.
Yes. I was fortunate. I grew up in that type of home. My grandfather would tell me stories. Not all the extraterrestrial stories. I ended up finding those out from my parents. And then I just started asking questions that I never thought to ask, and was told, "Oh, yes, that was actually quite normal. And there's a reason your grandfather had a telescope." I'm like, huh.
Oh, yeah. Me too, not.
Wow. Why did I
not in my life. Generational medium, and didn't find anything out until after she passed away.
It's usually the way.
Yeah.
Because I wonder if they're still in that mindset where, like, no, we don't talk about that.
Yes. Well, my grandmother used to take me aside and say to me, "We don't come from here, Suze." She wouldn't tell me or couldn't tell me where we came from, but she would say that quite frequently, "We don't come from here, Suze."
Right.
And also she would talk about how in the latter part of her life, when she was bedridden and in a very bad way, emotionally as well as physically, she said this ball of light would come and talk to her at night and comfort her. So, there's telepathy with an orb of light. And I wish that that I had, more years to talk to her about her experiences, because, as you said, Michelle, they were taught to be quiet about such things.
Yes. Well, I don't know. Now it's asking the right questions, I find, because the generation now is, I don't have my grandparents. I don't have my mother. My father has Alzheimer's. So now I'm just kind of like, who am I going to bug now about all this?
The ghost box.
Yeah. Well, just because you have, aunts and uncles and they grew up in the same house doesn't mean they're as open-minded.
Yeah, that's right.
No.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like you say, certain parts of the population do not want anything to do with it. Out of sight, out of mind, don't know, don't care. And then you have those of us who are like, did you see that? So yeah, I'm one of those people. But so, with all of that being said, then do you have like what advice do you feel that hybrids are trying to put out there? I mean, for people who are being vocal about it, like Dolly, for one, she'll tell you, no, I'm supposed to put the word out. I'm supposed to bring people together. Do you have a commonality, I guess, between them all for the ones that you've encountered?
Yeah. I have sort of varying impressions of that, because what I would like to do is talk to some of those people and see where I think they might fit in the three waves, because sometimes people, if they fit into what I call the first wave, which is the enlighteners, they're here to show us what we're capable of. Mm-hmm. And they may well be hybrids, but they're here to show off certain skills and exhibit certain skills that to help humanity become familiar with that and accepting of that kind of thing. And that might be just their whole purpose here. Right. And then there are others who are supposed to do public speaking or write books or do films,
right?
Talk to groups, etc. So it just depends whether you are exhibiting your information that you would like to spread to people in a very private and minimalized way, or whether it's to a broader audience. And I think that probably everyone has a slightly different, although they may fit into a particular group or not, everyone also has a slightly different purpose depending on their skills and abilities. So I think it's a very individual thing myself.
Right. And these dangers that you speak of for contactees, experiencers, abductees, what should we all be concerned about?
Absolutely. Good
Yeah,
question.
because that's going to determine how many people actually come forward.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yes. Well, I think the more public you become, or the more publicly you speak, that's where the danger lies. And I know a number of experienced lawyers on the speaking circuits and etc., who have had their lives threatened and have been told to shut up. And as well as, UFO sighting researchers have experienced the same over the years. So I've been subjected to quite a bit of that myself. So I always say to people, be careful. Be very sure that that's what you want to do. If you want to go public or be in the public eye in some way, you be very sure that you can live with that, because you've got families and friends and relatives you have to take into account as well.
But there are those who believe if you are in the public, I've always been told, talk about it, just put it out there, because it basically minimizes the chances. Mind you, I don't do circuits either. Like, I'm not on the UFO stage. I'm just like a public figure who happens to be doing a radio show this year. So, so I don't know, but I'm very open about it. I figured, you have all the information you want.
Yeah, I guess it depends how specific your information is and how much that information may be a threat to certain governmental bodies or whatever. I think that's the main thing is how much your information may impact what they want the public to know and what they want the public to believe.
That's how I feel, Suzy. I feel like they give you whatever people call them downloads or whatever information, specifically what they want out, and they can control what they don't want you to be out there saying as well.
Our personality as a human and our ego or whatever also comes into it, Amelia. And
I love the way you say my name. The accent. You can say it 100 times. Seriously. Oh my God, it's so pretty.
And I think I lost train of thought.
Way to go, Bubbles. You just messed Suzy up completely.
You were talking about you were explaining how they give you the information and who.
Yeah, I know. I'll give you the example of something that happened years ago for me, and I was just starting to understand what I seemed to be a part of and what was happening to me. And a UFO researcher in New Zealand, who was a very good friend of mine, an elderly man, he said he'd been asked to go on a radio show and talk a little bit about sightings, and he also thought that because I had disclosed some of my contact experiences to him, he thought it would be good if I was put on for a few minutes. So the radio show agreed to that, and he asked me if I would do it, and I said, no, I'm not ready for that. I don't want to do that. And he pleaded, and they made promises that they wouldn't use my name, etc., and I'd have a pseudonym. And he just kept asking and asking until I said, okay, I'll do it. So I did it, and the radio announcer was really rude to me, very disbelieving, and a lot of derision, and cut me off. That had a terrible effect. So, I sort of closed down for a couple of years after that. So I think, you have to be aware of whether you want to speak out and how you're going to speak out and is it the best way that's being offered to you to do that? Because there's lots of different ways that you can impart information.
Yeah. That's a tough one because it's something that not everybody's overly versed in the do's and don'ts. You either want to tell your story or you want to avoid it altogether. I do have another question.
It's the same with mediumship. I mean, a lot of people in my life, in my immediate family, had no clue about me until I allowed it to happen and I said something. Dolly asks, have you been taught astronomical science by ET? I don't even know what that is.
Astronomy.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Well, I've been shown holograms and had some things described to me, but not in a scientific sense. I'm not a scientist, and that's not my role. My role, they told me from quite young, was to do public speaking. So that's what I do. I've written stuff. I've been in documentaries and written articles, do public speaking. And I have seen on board craft a whole auditorium on a massive craft filled with scientists who were actually in an altered state, so they weren't really 100% aware of where they were. They just they were in a hazy state where they were able to absorb certain information given to them in what I call packets of information put into their minds by the ETs. Useful information, positive information, nothing scary about it, but they weren't entirely aware that they were on a craft. They just thought they were in an auditorium, and I think that's the way a lot of our discoveries and a lot of our movement in science has been brought about by the ETs, because science for a long time has been very resistant towards these subjects of contact and UFO sightings. There's been some who've worked behind the scenes, like Dr. Rudy Schild, who contributed to my book, the late Dr. John Mack, and many others, scientists. But more recently, scientists have sort of come out of the closet, and many more are attending conferences now, scientific conferences on the subject, and really moving forward in their understanding of it.
To have a scientific mind and to be an experiencer at the same time, that's got to be very conflicting on different levels, especially if you're not, you're only allowed to remember certain bits. And how do you know it's at an implanted memory?
Oof, that's a good one. Yeah.
Well,
that's a big question right now, though. Sorry.
I know quite a few scientists who've made contact with me, or who are colleagues in groups I belong to, who, to me, are probably experiencers but don't realise it. And I haven't said that to them, haven't suggested that to them. But sometimes they agree as a soul to work alongside someone like myself, for example, or you, Michelle. And they are brought to you at a time in your life when you need that. And I'll give you an example of that. I saw a video of Dr. Rudy Schild talking about quasars and black holes on the internet, which I watched. And as soon as I saw him, I felt as if I knew him very well and had known him for years and had to urgently contact him. And at the time, I was just starting to write my book. So I tried to track him down, and unsuccessful for a while, and then finally managed to contact him. Told him I was writing a book, that I'd seen his face and felt like I knew him, even though I didn't. And he said, I'd be very interested to hear what you're writing. It really surprised me that an astrophysicist would be interested. And at that point, I didn't know that he'd worked closely with Dr. John Mack and was very accepting of experiencers' accounts. So I sent him some of my book, and he came back and just said, oh, yeah, this is very familiar to me in terms of physics. I understand this, so send me some more. And I'd sent him some chapters that were fairly tame. He said, send me your 3 chapters that you think might really trip me up or shock me. So he wrote back and said, these are the ones I understand the most. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here in terms of physics. in cosmology. So he said, I'll help you understand some of the scientific things that you've come across on craft that you don't understand well. I said, okay. But in the end, he just said, look, if it's okay with you, I'd like to be part of the book because I've been waiting for some information like this to come along, and I'd like to be part of this book. And I said, oh, that's fine by me.
Oh, fabulous.
Than I can.
Right.
Nice.
Right. Well, it just keeps growing and expanding, just like a wealth of knowledge in one place. Okay, here's another question. Wayne?
Yes. Wayne Suzy, did ET ever disclose to you what types of people they are looking for to make contact with? Is there a certain criteria that they are more actively seeking?
From my experience and understanding, other people may feel differently, but speaking from my own experience, they make contact with you when you're still a soul in the great field of consciousness. You're a little spark out there, and that's when they contact you. For a number of years, I had this kind of like a flashback thing that kept recurring in my mind of being a ball of light and being in front of almost like an interview panel, if I can put it that way, of wise souls.
Right.
And they were discussing whether I could live a particular life and achieve certain things in that life as a part of a plan and a program, an agenda. And so I was interviewed along with another soul, a blue light that turned out to be my eldest son, who, of course, was born many years later. And these two souls were going to be close together and working together. And so I had this idea that this was decided before I came into this planet. So I don't think they're actually looking for humans to be part of this agenda. They've already contacted you when you were a soul, and they've interviewed you, so to speak, and made a decision. So there's the free will thing is not 100% correct.
Oh,
in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Oh no,
that's interesting.
But on another occasion, when I was on craft, they were telling me that they were going to be doing with this large craft a sweep of some cities over a particular country. And I've only ever heard one other experiencer talk about this. So there's that corroboration. It's a very, very specific detail. So to hear another experiencer say this was very important to me. And that is that they had the technology to just scan over a city, scan the city, so to speak, and isolate souls. They're not looking at you as a human, they're looking at your soul. Yeah. Of certain spiritual understanding or certain evolution, and they may utilize those people to work alongside and assist other people who are in the programs in the agenda doing specific things. So you sometimes have people who turn up in your life at an opportunity, at a time when you need something, and they turn up and they play a role in your life for a short time or several years or whatever, and then they just kind of drift off and you lose contact with them. But they've assisted you through something in some way, and this is the sort of thing that we're talking about. But particularly in light of experiencers achieving certain goals and getting information out there or whatever, or scientists who've been taken on board, this is a very important thing. They may achieve some funding to investigate something, or they may be put in touch with another scientist in another country who furthers their research into something that relates to ET contact or UFOs.
Wow.
Oh, I like that. Sounds hopeful. So, on many levels. We just have to do a station and sponsor ID, please.
Yes, thank you. You are listening to The Outer Realm with Michelle Desrochers and Amelia Pisano, coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans on 105.3 and 107.7 FM radio. We are live and archived on Roku. So if you're tuning in from Roku TV, hello and welcome Don't forget to save us and look for our archives as well. Share us with your friends. Our guest tonight is Suzy Hansen. She is, and I had to write this down, the founder of UFOFUCUS New Zealand Research Network. And she's also brought her book, The Dual Soul Collection, and we're discussing that as well tonight and her experiences. But if you're just tuning in, don't worry about that. You can stream on our archives, rather, on any platform you normally use. Don't forget to share us with your friends. We're going to say that share word quite often tonight. Huge thank you to the amazing people. Sorry, I laugh at my own jokes, at Folgers Coffee for sponsoring our show from the beginning and continue to sponsor us. We really do appreciate your support and we love you. Thank you so much. A shout out and thank you for our intro and outro to Dr. Snick, the sonic surgeon. Justin Snicker is award-winning vocalist, composer, and musician. You can find his music on Amazon and Bandcamp and check him out on Facebook and Instagram. Now, if you're listening to us on Facebook or watching us on Facebook or YouTube, please make sure to give us a like, subscribe, and share. And that goes for any of the streams that you're using. Thank you. Hi, Tamara, just in time. I told them to share.
Oh my goodness. Okay, back to the show. So ET's primary message to humanity. And do we have time? I feel like we're a bunch of toddlers in the sandbox who just can't play nicely with others.
Well, I think we've sort of just about run out of time in terms of what's happening to our weather, our climate. We're having increased a lot of natural disasters happening, floods worldwide.
That's happening right now.
Changes in our weather patterns, our food, availability, the world economy, wars. We're not coping that well as a global civilization, and people are hopeful that disclosure might take place and the ETs will come down and solve everything, but they won't, because the catchphrase that they have given for this agenda I outline in my book is change from within. So they're not here to save us. They are working on changing us, teaching us and getting us to change ourselves.
And to save ourselves. Yeah.
And as a teacher, I know you can't, you can tell a child something, but when they experience it for themselves and work on it themselves, they're more likely to follow through and achieve something than having things handed to them on a plate all the time. So, we might be, they could come down and look like the oppressors. Many people in society, if they came down and said, oh, we're here to save you, would look at them as the enemy and the oppressors. I think we have to understand that we made this mess and we have to help create a better mess, because it's going to be very difficult to solve the problems that we've created. And how much can we do? We have to work really hard on this. It could take decades to clean up our own mess. And is it too late? I don't know. What they are telling experiencers at the moment is to prepare. And I put that on my Facebook page several years ago, because that was when I was getting the message, prepare. So prepare for survival. And since that time, we've seen so much happening on the planet that is a threat to our survival. And many people are doing absolutely nothing about it, going about their day-to-day life and not looking at the safety and survival of their own family or friends. So these are the kinds of things that experiencers can talk out about, because many experiencers have had these end times in inverted brackets, because I don't think it's going to end, but end time apocalyptic happenings and what we must do. Because unless we're showing some willingness to elevate our consciousness, elevate our spirituality, start taking care of this planet that is our home, who would want to meet us if we have that kind of attitude? They're not just here for our sake, they're here for theirs as well, because what we do in the microcosm is going to affect the macrocosm, the wider community of cosmic friends and neighbors.
Well, especially if you're factoring in many that are already here and who have always been here. We're not the first kick at the can. We're not the only ones here.
That's right. That's right. And I've said many times that we're just not aware of the realms that actually exist around our planet. They're in another form, another frequency. But what we do on this feet on the ground level affects the entities and beings in that realm as well. And to many people listening to me say that, they'll think, oh, that sounds a bit too far out there. But, it's not. Even scientists are talking about this possibility of other species being in our environment that we're just not aware of because we don't match their frequency yet.
All about vibration and frequency.
And so the more we elevate in spirituality and frequency and consciousness, the more we're going to be exposed to.
Wayne makes a good comment here, an analogy.
Okay. You want me to do it?
Sure.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I hesitated because of that leg, right? I don't want to go over you. As a parent, if I saw my child running towards certain death, I would do everything in my power to prevent that. I couldn't simply stand by hoping the child will figure it out in time.
Yeah, so I think this is maybe why people are feeling, well, what do you mean ET won't come and save us?
Yeah.
Well, who says ET is our parent? They don't look upon things that way. Their focus is on the soul and soul evolution. We're just the flesh that contains the soul. We're looking at millions of people on the planet who've lived lives elsewhere. We're a universal soul. We keep talking about a human soul. We're not a human soul.
No.
We're a universal soul inhabited in this life in a human body.
Having a human experience.
So there's a wider community here that they are talking to, and that's the universal soul. It's a much wider community. And do we take responsibility for our own actions, or when do we let go the parents' apron strings?
It's a tough call, because when you think, like when we were speaking earlier, just about how the ancients looked at everything, and then all of a sudden we get into this few decades, I'll say, I'm going to go there during the Roswell time, where everything seemed to go down the toilet bowl after that. It did take a few decades to get us here, but from the actions of a few. So it's like we're all getting dragged into this mess from the actions of a few. So why is it that we've been brought back into this decades, or they say how many hundreds of years have we been held back? We should be living in a much better place right now, like a Star Trek reality. I think our guest mentioned Brad Olson last night. So the actions of a few, we're all suffering. It's like the bully in the sandbox, and the rest of us have to go along for the punishment.
Yes, but often though the masses that are observing the actions of the few do nothing about it. So there's that saying, which I can't quite word for word, about you sit back and you say nothing. Are you as bad as the person doing the bad action? And what we as humanity need to do is collectively clean up our act, but also not be willing to tolerate things that we've been willing to tolerate in the past, and that's everything from political to medical to you name it, what's happening in schools. And all of these things have to change now, because those are very old systems that we've been living under.
Yes.
And if we were to look into the future, I think we would find the residue of humanity that will be living then may be much smaller in population and much closer to nature and valuing how nature nurtures us and us nature. So it's a reciprocal thing, and we're really missing out on that aspect big time, and that's one of the things destroying the planet.
Mm-hmm. That's a tough pill to swallow because, how do you stop a machine? We're, I mean, I know we're a tiny grain of sand on a very big beach, and you end up, we're victims of our governments, of our militaries.
Yeah.
It's hard to stop that machine once it starts.
Yes. I've been watching a UK television series, a series called The Capture. And it's really good because it talks about AI, but it talks about correction, where they can alter videos and alter voices, and they can have an AI person talking who appears to be the real person. So, and it's quite a frightening portend of our possible future.
Mm-hmm.
And we are all responsible for speaking out about what's happening in our own communities, and I think we can all do that.
Mm-hmm.
To an extent. We're not just talking about talking about experiences on board craft or whatever and revealing that. Experiences have a wider understanding than that. Many experiences are looking at the way the climate and the weather is changing and our food is becoming unstable and all of that kind of thing, the wars. They have a much wider understanding of humanity, and that's what we need to be speaking out about, is what's happening in our own communities that we know is wrong. And how many people actually do that? We often leave it up, as you said, Michelle, to the few to do that.
Mm-hmm. So where do we go from here? What do you see for us as this species, based on all this information that you're given from all of these experiencers? Where do we go from here? Are they stepping up their game? So, contacting more people? What, do we come together? Do we all go stand on top of a mountain and say, "Yeah, we're here"? Kidding, of course. But
well, I think we will have some tough times to face, and
okay.
I don't want to sound pessimistic, but get your civil defence kit ready, folks.
Right.
We're going to face some tough times on all levels, and we have to really become aware of the politics on this planet and how that operates and whether it's beneficial and when it's not beneficial, and be able to speak out about that.
Mm-hmm.
But also I think that we have to have hope and faith. We have a lot of people coming forward in high positions, giving a lot of hopeful information about the UFO field, etc., particularly in the States.
Mm-hmm.
But, how much of that do we take on board, given the history of releases of information in the past?
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't always been correct.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants at the moment. I think we're in a position where anything could happen, and so many people at the moment are living day by day, looking at their situation day by day and being watchful of what's happening around them. But certainly the ETs, never once have they said that our existence on this planet will cease. They have always said we've got some massive stuff to go through. And on one occasion I was in an auditorium and in an undersea base, and we were shown a massive screen with tragic images of earth changes and severe weather conditions, etc., and wars that several images, they speeded it up until several images were showing per second. And we were able to absorb the frequency of those images, not necessarily what was actually on each frame, but the frequency it conveyed and the emotions that it engendered in us. And it was the most horrifying thing to go through. But then they calmed us all down afterwards and said, this is what you have to work towards sustaining life through this, and knowing that on the other side there will be something better, but you will be creating it with their assistance, but we will be needing to create it for ourselves.
So are we going to be creating it in physical, as a physical manner, or are we going to be back in spirit? Because that tells me if we're looking at war, if we're looking at, are we looking at a planetary catastrophe? Because they see souls, they don't see physical, remember?
That's right. And they're going to see, they're already putting out there, and I mention this in a chapter in my book, how they are already taking souls on board craft prior to big events happening where people lose their life. And they're asking those souls, you know, unfortunately, you're going to lose your life. And they accept this. I write about this. I had to write it really delicately, but it needed to be said in this chapter about soul acceptance, that, you know, things are going to happen on the planet, and you may lose your life. And they're asking them to come back to the ETs on board, ready for an education and then a reasonably swift incarnation. So people who've been through something and learnt something from it are going to be educated on craft as a soul and then incarnate back down. And these are going to be people who lead humanity into the future with a greater understanding.
Wow, that's deep.
That's just a very brief overview of what I'm about.
Yes. Wow, makes you wonder how fast you can incarnate again. I've heard different theories about, you know, souls maybe just stepping in, and other, you know, like physical people just, you know, willing to step out for those more advanced souls that can, just because of a time factor. So have you heard of any of that sort of theory? Because I know that's one that's out there floating around as well.
No, it's always been taking souls on board, either as balls of light or in a physical form, and talking to them about the possibilities. I hear so many people say, oh, the Greys, you know, they're terrible, and they, you know, they are controllers, and they do this and they do that. But in all of the experiences that I have had, they are very aware of the soul state and soul permission for many things. And this goes right through the hybrid situation, the, you know, seeing your baby and holding your baby on craft, etc. There's a great delicacy takes place behind the scenes that in our human form we may not recall. We may recall it as being heartrending or, you know, a unpleasant situation, but there is always the soul contract.
Well, I have to say this has been an enlightening experience. I love hearing the stories, especially when it's a collection and compilation of so many different people having these experiences. It's always nice to know that there's more out there than we think there is, and that it's not always horrific experiences, because we hear it all the time. Everything is always just scary and horrific, and I love to hear when they're not, when it is something more positive and there's a message of hope attached to that. So what's next for you, Suzy Hansen? What do you have coming up, and how can everyone find you?
Well, given that I live down in New Zealand,
Right,
and that airfares are really expensive, I can't imagine anyone's going to fly me to speak at a conference anywhere anytime soon.
right.
But at the moment, I'm working with 2 experiencer groups, the formation of them, and I can't divulge more about that at the moment, but I would like experiencers to know that there's something coming up that's going to be really big for experiencers. We see a lot of groups forming around the world that are sighting related, nuts and bolts related, and I belong to one of those called ICER, but International Coalition of Extraterrestrial Research. But at present, we are focusing on the sightings side of things. but there's something coming up that's quite big, which will be announced. So experiencers out there have hope that there's going to be some really great representation of experiencers happening. For me personally, well, I do speeches and interviews on Zoom. I'm partway through writing my second book, and I'm continuing work with UFOCUS NZ in New Zealand and Communicatorlink, which is my other website where I talk to experiencers and mentor them through things. I'm also working closely with some authors at the moment who are putting books out there about the subject, both sightings and experiencer material.
Wonderful.
So I'm working with those people to prior to them putting new books out.
Wonderful. And how can people find you?
They can find me on YouTube, Suzy Hansen channel, on Facebook, Suzy Hansen, and my websites are ufocusnz.org.nz and communicatorlink.com.
Okay. I have one question, and it's come up twice, and I'm sorry. We have like 8 chat rooms that come in like a super highway and down to one slow lane. So, okay. Last question.
Adriana. Hi, Adriana. Do you believe in the theory that ET are just humans from the future or evolved humans?
Yeah, that's a current theory. That's it's been around a long time, but it seems to be having a resurgence of interest at the moment. And look, anything is possible. I keep my mind open to all possibilities until I get a clear indication one way or another, and that is entirely possible.
Your cover is stunning.
Thank you.
Excellent.
It's very beautiful.
So, and where can you find your books? Does that come on your website, or do they go to Amazon?
It's on Amazon, in Kindle and paperback.
Okay, there you guys go. The Dual Soul Connection by Suzy Hansen. Find it on Amazon, just for our audio listeners. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I am just grateful you finally made it. And I'm looking forward to your next book. I know you probably can't get into a whole lot about it, but I would love to have you back on again, because I know that we're just a wealth of information, and you're definitely a delight to have on. So thank you for sharing everything with us.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. So I bid you good night,
and happy Friday.
Happy Friday, yes.
She's a day ahead. It's
Not
afternoon.
That's right.
Right. Bon appetito. That dinner's coming.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Suzy. Good night.
Good night.
Good afternoon. Yeah, good night for us. Well, we've come to the end of another fantastic segment here on the Outer Realm. As always, that was just fabulous. We've waited a while, and it was definitely well worth it. And of course, with all the chat rooms coming in, I think everybody agrees. So big thank you to Suzy Hansen for being a part of our journey in the show this evening. Big thank you to Folgers Coffee for sponsoring tonight's show. Big thank you to Justin Snicker, aka Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, for his contribution. Big thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind all of our artwork. Thank you. Guys, if you want to email us, please, theouterrealmcontact@gmail.com. So check us out that way, and you will get a response. So next week, we have the return of our dear friend and frequent flyer guest, as I like to call them, Michael J.S. Carter. You guys all know him from the hit TV show Ancient Aliens. He's been on a few times, and he's always a delight and always full of information, and he's got a lot of stuff coming to share with us all. So you're going to have to tune in for that. Also, Thursday night is the return of someone who hasn't been on the show for quite some time now, but Chris Stiles. Now, you're going to see a lot of guests coming on from the Halifax Symposium, which is coming this October. We've had things on the show about it already. And of course, the Outer Realm is a sponsor of the Halifax Symposium. Yes, we do that every now and then. So anyway, we're going to start featuring some of the guests who will be speaking out at the symposium. And we're doing this because this is Canada bred, man. Yeah. Woo. So we love it. So Chris Stiles is going to be coming on. He's known for his research on the Shag Harbor UFO occurrence, but this time he's going to be discussing in great detail his research on what's called the Shelburne Sweep Clear 5 mission. Okay, so this is another whole UFO thing, and it's pretty detailed. He has sent over, photos and such. It's like, okay, can't wait. So that's a little bit of what he'll be talking about at the symposium for people who want to go check them out in person. You'll get little snippets here. So he's going to be the first of the guests to come and spend some time with us. So that is next week. And here in Canada, we've got the May 2-4 weekend, right? It's a Victoria Day weekend coming up, long weekend. So for those of you traveling, please be safe on the roads, and we're going to see you all next week.
Don't drink and drive.
Don't drink and drive, and other things. Anyway, we'll see you all here next week. All right, guys.